Elena stood in her mother's tiny apartment, balancing a bag of groceries on one hip and an eviction notice in her other hand. Her mother, Isabel, 78, a retired seamstress, sat at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album. "Mija, look how young you were here," she said, tapping a picture of Elena in her chef's whites, standing in front of her once-renowned restaurant, Estrella Roja. Elena forced a smile. She didn't have the heart to tell her mother that the restaurant was gone. That the bank had taken it. That she was broke. Instead, she set the groceries down and started preparing dinner. Nothing fancy. Just simple arroz con pollo, the kind her mother used to make when she was a child. As she stirred the pot, her phone buzzed. It was an email. "We regret to inform you that your application for the head chef position has been declined." Another rejection. She had applied to over 20 restaurants. Each time, they told her the same thing. "You're too experienced. Your salary expectations don't fit our budget. We're looking for someone younger who can keep up with the fast-paced environment." They didn't want experience. They wanted cheap labor. She gritted her teeth, dropping the phone onto the counter. She had spent 2 decades training chefs, mentoring young talent. Now? They were getting hired over her. Her mother looked up from the table. "Mija, are you okay?" Elena took a deep breath. She had to be strong. "Of course, Mama. Everything's fine." But everything was falling apart. A week later, Elena stood outside the restaurant that had once been hers. The familiar red awning was gone, replaced by a sleek, modern black and white sign. The gold lettering read, "Casa Nueva." Her stomach twisted. She had known it was coming. The landlord had given her no choice but to leave. But standing here, staring at the place she had spent 2 decades building, it felt like a fresh wound being ripped open. Through the glass windows, she could see the kitchen, her kitchen. The same layout. The same marble countertops she had fought to install. Then she saw him. Mateo. Her former sous chef. The young man she had trained, mentored, trusted. He stood behind the counter, giving instructions to a group of cooks. Wearing the uniform of Casa Nueva. She felt her pulse quicken. She had assumed Mateo had taken another job when he left a few months before Estrella Roja closed. She had even encouraged him to go, told him to chase new opportunities. She never thought he would end up here. The door swung open, and before she could turn away, Mateo spotted her. For a second, his face flickered with something, guilt, maybe. But then it was gone. He stepped forward, trying to smile. "Elena. I was hoping I'd run into you." Her jaw tightened. "Are you the new head chef?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Executive chef, actually." She exhaled slowly, willing herself to stay calm. She wanted to believe he didn't know. That he hadn't been involved in whatever corporate deal had stolen her restaurant. But then, a server walked past them carrying a plate. Elena's eyes locked onto the dish. Spanish-style braised oxtail. Slow-cooked for hours in red wine and saffron broth. Served over a delicate bed of rice. Her dish. Her signature. She stared at it, then back at Mateo. "You're cooking my recipes." Mateo's expression didn't change. "It's a similar version." Rage surged in her chest. "No. That's my dish. I created that. You learned it from me." Mateo sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Elena. It's complicated. The corporate team wanted something familiar for the menu. I suggested a few of your dishes, and they." "You suggested them?" Her voice was sharp now. "It's just business." 2 words. 2 words that knocked the air out of her lungs. Business. Like the years she had spent mentoring him, pushing him to be better, teaching him everything she knew, meant nothing. Like all of it was just some transaction. Mateo shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean." Elena held up a hand, cutting him off. Enough. She had seen what she needed to see. They had taken her restaurant. They had taken her recipes. Now? They thought they had taken her future too. Fine. She turned on her heel and walked away, head held high. Let them think they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Elena's footsteps were steady as she walked away from Casa Nueva, but inside, she was burning. Mateo had stolen her dishes, and he had stood there without an ounce of shame. It's just business. The words rattled in her skull like loose change. Was this what loyalty meant? Was this what 20 years of sweat, sacrifice, and late nights had amounted to? She had built a reputation, a legacy. And now? It belonged to someone else. No. She wasn't going to let them take everything. She spent the next week looking for work. Not as a restaurant owner. Not as a chef with a Michelin star. As a line cook. A prep cook. Anything. Every interview was the same. You have an incredible background, but we're looking for someone who fits our budget. With your experience, wouldn't you be more comfortable consulting? To be honest, we just need someone who can move fast in a high-energy kitchen. She was too experienced. Too expensive. Too old. They didn't care that she could outcook their entire staff. They didn't care that she had led kitchens, trained teams, built menus. To them, she was a relic of a past industry. She left each interview humiliated but not surprised. One afternoon, after yet another rejection, she sat in her tiny apartment with her mother, Isabel. They don't want me, Mama. Isabel looked up from her sewing, her lined face calm. Then make them. Elena scoffed. It's not that simple. Her mother reached for the tablet on the counter. She tapped on a news article. Food truck industry booming as restaurants struggle to recover. Elena frowned. Food trucks? She had spent her entire life in fine dining. White tablecloths, plated perfection, Michelin inspectors lurking in the shadows. But that world had shut its doors on her. She had two choices: keep begging to be let back in, or create something new. She exhaled sharply. Maybe it was time to change the game. Elena emptied her savings account, the last of what she had left, and bought a rundown, grease-stained food truck. It smelled like burnt oil. The fryer barely worked. The griddle had years of charred residue. It was nothing like the pristine kitchens she had worked in before, but it was hers, and that meant something. Her first week was a disaster. She burned half her ingredients, miscalculated portion sizes, and moved too slowly, still stuck in the habits of fine dining. The fryer overheated, the griddle cooked unevenly, and she ran out of food by 8 p.m. because she was preparing dishes with the precision of a Michelin-starred kitchen instead of a fast-moving street vendor. Customers left frustrated, shaking their heads as they walked away. By midnight, she sat in the driver's seat of her truck, staring at the stack of cash she had made. It wasn't enough. She had bet everything on this, and she was failing. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, memories of Estrella Roja, of her mother's eviction notice, of every restaurant that had turned her away. Had she made a mistake? Had Mateo been right? Had the industry moved on without her? She gritted her teeth and pulled out a notebook, the same kind she had used back when she was designing menus for her restaurant. She listed every mistake, every delay, every inefficiency. Fine dining was about control, precision, artistry. This was about speed, adaptability, and feeding people without pretension. The next day, she changed everything. She streamlined her menu, simplified her plating, and prepped ingredients in advance. She let go of perfection and embraced the chaos. By the end of the second week, her line was longer, her service smoother, and customers were returning. Word spread, people whispered about the Michelin-starred chef serving Spanish street food from a truck, about how her paella had more soul than anything in the high-end restaurants. The crowd grew. But it wasn't just curiosity anymore. They came back because the food was damn good. One night, as Elena wiped down the counters of her food truck after a long shift, she heard laughter and the clinking of silverware from across the street. She turned and saw the bright lights of Casa Nueva, its patio filled with customers sipping wine and enjoying their meals. And then she saw it, a familiar plate being placed in front of a diner. Spanish-style braised oxtail with saffron rice. Her stomach twisted, but this time it wasn't just anger. It was resolve. Mateo and his corporate bosses hadn't just stolen her recipes. They were profiting off them while she was working 16-hour days in a truck. Fine. If they wanted a fight, she'd give them one. The next morning, she parked directly across from Casa Nueva. She wasn't subtle about it. She fired up the grill, letting the rich aroma of chorizo and caramelized onions fill the street. She crisped the edges of her tortillas until they curled, ladled hot saffron broth over steaming rice, and plated her oxtail, the real version, the one she had perfected over decades. People took notice. The first few came out of curiosity, then more. Soon, her line stretched down the block while Casa Nueva's dining room sat half-empty. Customers who had once dined at Estrella Roja whispered as they passed, "This is the real thing." She kept her head down, cooking with the speed and precision she had trained for years. But out of the corner of her eye, she saw Mateo standing at the host stand, watching. She let him watch. By the end of the night, as she packed up the last of her supplies, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Control. They had taken everything from her. But now? She was taking it back. The battle had begun. The next morning, Elena arrived early, prepping her ingredients before the lunch rush. As she diced peppers and simmered saffron-infused broth, she scrolled through her phone. Social media was buzzing. Food bloggers, local critics, and even former Estrella Roja customers were posting about her truck. You want real Spanish food? Skip the corporate knockoff. Chef Elena is back, and she's serving the dishes they stole. The post had thousands of likes. She smirked. Then her phone buzzed again, this time with something far less amusing. A message from a blocked number. You can't park there forever. She exhaled slowly, locking her screen. Casa Nueva was feeling the pressure. Good. That night, as she handed out the last of her orders, a city health inspector showed up. We've received multiple complaints about food safety violations, he said, flipping through his clipboard. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, unfazed. Everything's up to code, she said, crossing her arms. Want to check for yourself? The inspector hesitated. He knew it. She knew it. This wasn't about safety. It was about power. He left without writing a single citation. That night, she drove back to her mother's apartment, exhaustion settling in. As she stepped inside, she found Isabel sitting at the table, staring at a pile of past due bills. Mija, are you sure this is working? Elena hesitated. She was making money, more than she had in months. But it still wasn't enough to cover rent for both of them, and her mother's medical expenses were piling up. She walked over, pressing a kiss to Isabel's forehead. Give me a little more time, Mama. But deep down, she knew, Casa Nueva wasn't going to stop. And if she wanted to win, she had to do more than just fight them head-on. She had to build something bigger. Elena sat in the dim glow of her food truck's dashboard, staring at the numbers scribbled in her notebook. She had made more in the past 2 weeks than she ever expected, but it still wasn't enough. Not enough to cover her mother's medical bills. Not enough to secure a permanent location. Not enough to survive the corporate war Casa Nueva was waging against her. She needed something more than a food truck battle. She needed allies. The next morning, she made a list. Other chefs, line cooks, bakers, the people she had worked alongside for years who had lost everything when their restaurants shut down. She started making calls. One by one, they told the same story. Too old. Too expensive. Overqualified. Their careers had been stripped away, just like hers. But some of them weren't ready to give up. First, there was Rosa, a pastry chef in her 50s who had lost her bakery in a bitter divorce and now worked in a supermarket stocking frozen bread. Then came Angela, a former sous chef who had been let go when her employer replaced half their kitchen staff with younger, lower-paid hires. And then Carmen, a 60-year-old food truck driver who knew every prime parking location in the city. They met at a small diner, pushing together two scratched-up tables in the back corner. Elena laid out her idea. We can't fight these corporations alone. But together? We can change the game. She pulled out a rough business plan. A food truck cooperative. Shared kitchen space. A rotating schedule of chefs, each specializing in their own cuisine. A way for all of them to get back on their feet. Angela leaned forward. You mean Michelin on wheels? Elena's lips curled into a slow smile. Exactly. They started small. Rosa converted a section of her tiny apartment into a test kitchen, baking hand-rolled empanadas and delicate pastries that Elena would sell from her truck. Angela, with her background in high-end Italian, started crafting fresh pasta dishes to be featured on rotating menus. And Carmen? She secured the best late-night spots, using her connections to keep the trucks one step ahead of Casa Nueva's corporate influence. What started as one truck became 3. Then 5. Then 7. And the city took notice. People loved the story. Independent chefs, many of them middle-aged women, taking on the industry that had discarded them. Hashtag spread online. Hashtag Grey Apron Movement. Hashtag Real Chefs Real Food. Soon, even the press got involved. Local journalists covered their success. Food critics who had once written about Estrella Roja now stood in line for paella served in takeout containers. And then, one afternoon, Elena's phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She answered. Chef Elena, a smooth voice asked. We'd like to discuss a business opportunity. She sat up. Who is this? A pause. The owners of Casa Nueva. She smiled. It was about time. Elena sat at a cafe downtown, her hands wrapped around a cup of strong black coffee as she watched the doors of Casa Nueva across the street. She knew exactly why she was here. The corporate owners of the very restaurant that stole her recipes had requested a meeting. They had ignored her when they thought she was just another failed chef, another casualty of the post-pandemic collapse. Now? They couldn't afford to ignore her anymore. The moment the door swung open, she recognized the man who approached, Leon Vargas, regional director of Casa Nueva. Tailored suit, gold cufflinks, the kind of man who had never stepped foot in a kitchen except to shake a chef's hand for a publicity photo. And behind him? Mateo. Elena leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. She wasn't here to beg. Leon took the seat across from her, folding his hands neatly on the table. Chef Elena, we've been following your progress. Your food truck collective is quite impressive. Elena raised an eyebrow. And yet, 2 months ago, I was too old and too expensive for this industry. What changed? Mateo shifted uncomfortably, but Leon didn't miss a beat. Business is always evolving, he said smoothly. We're interested in a collaboration. Your brand has value. Michelin recognition and incredible backstory. We'd like to make you an offer. Elena tilted her head. An offer? Leon slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract. She scanned the terms. A brand partnership. Casa Nueva would absorb Michelin on wheels, provide funding, infrastructure, in exchange for full creative control. They wanted to own her, her food, her story. She closed the folder and set it back down. Let me get this straight, she said, voice steady. First, you take my restaurant. Then, you steal my recipes. And now, because you see me succeeding, you want to buy me out? Leon smiled, the kind of smile that had closed 100 business deals before this one. That's not how I would phrase it, but, yes. Elena exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. You don't get it, do you? She said, leaning forward. I don't need your offer. I already won. Leon's confident expression flickered. Matteo finally spoke. Elena, be realistic. The restaurant business is brutal. You know that. You've built something incredible, but this is stability. Security. Elena turned to him, her voice calm but firm. Security? Like the kind I had before you walked out and sold my recipes? Matteo swallowed hard. Leon sighed. We're offering you a way back in. A chance to be bigger than a food truck. Elena laughed under her breath. Bigger than a food truck? She gestured out the cafe window. Across the street, the line for Michelin on wheels stretched around the block. She stood, adjusting her coat. You're right, Leon. The restaurant business is brutal. And I'm not interested in working for the people who tried to destroy me. She pushed the contract back toward him. So here's my offer. Leon raised an eyebrow. Elena smiled. Get used to losing customers. Then she walked out, stepping into the city she had reclaimed, where her food, her real food, was waiting for her. Elena stepped out into the crisp evening air, the neon lights of Michelin on wheels glowing in the distance. The scent of saffron and roasted peppers lingered in the streets, mingling with the hum of conversation and the rhythmic clatter of spatulas against griddles. This was hers. Not some corporate chain. Not a carefully packaged brand controlled by men in suits. This was real. As she crossed the street, she caught sight of her mother, Isabel, sitting near the counter of her truck, chatting with Rosa and Angela. The women who had been discarded by the industry, now running the busiest food trucks in the city. She walked toward them, rolling up the sleeves of her chef's coat. The night was just getting started, and the crowd was already growing. Carmen, the 60-year-old truck driver who had secured their best parking spots, called out, "You look like a woman who just turned down a lot of money." Elena smirked. I look like a woman who's exactly where she's supposed to be. The doors to Casa Nueva opened, and she saw Matteo standing at the entrance, watching her. For a moment, he hesitated, then stepped forward, weaving through the customers until he stood a few feet away. His eyes flicked to the long line at her truck, then back to her. You really think you can beat them? He asked, voice quiet. Elena exhaled, glancing at the crowd, at her mother, at the women behind the grills. She already had. I don't need to beat them, she said. I'm building something better. Matteo hesitated. He looked over his shoulder at the restaurant he had chosen, then back at Elena's truck, at the warmth, the energy, the unmistakable pulse of something real. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Elena didn't wait for his response. She turned, stepping back behind the counter, grabbing a ladle, pouring saffron broth over a steaming plate of rice. The line kept growing. Casa Nueva would survive. But Michelin on wheels would thrive. Because people didn't just come for the food. They came for the fight. They came for her. And this time, no one could take it away.